What's going on, guys, and welcome to the New Bark News Podcast for February 24th, 2019. I'm joined by Logan as per usual, and we're going to start with some of the major releases for this week. So, obviously, the biggest one was probably Anthem, which came to us via BioWare, and from what I've heard, this was a pretty lukewarm reception. What have you heard about it, my guy?
Well, only that yeah, pretty much what you said. Very lukewarm. Not much positive, not too much negative. It's all very round, underwhelming.
Yeah, that's more or less what I'm getting from it too. I mean, the general synopsis seems to be A, the story's extremely lackluster, which is especially disappointing for a BioWare game, considering storytelling was one of the things that really hyped them up back in the day, especially with games like Star Wars The Old Republic, and that a lot of the better content comes at the very end of the game, which is very small in scale compared to the grinding you have to do to get there.
Yikes.
Yeah. To me, it kind of, unfortunately, I feel like this has kind of been a tendency with these MMO shooter on console type of things, even though this did also come to PC. Because if I'm remembering correctly, this is basically the same reception we got with Destiny back in the day. Is like, this is crap. This is crap. I mean, it's fun gameplay, but it's still crap. Like people were playing it because they wanted it to be good and they enjoyed certain elements a lot, but at the same time, they acknowledged that the game itself was very shaky. Only I'm under the impression Anthem's even kind of worse because it's extremely buggy right now and the load screens crash half the time on top of being all over the place and really slow.
Oh no, it got the worst of both worlds there.
Exactly. I mean, and that kind of brings up a major question that I think I've been asking myself a lot here lately, and that's, can we just really trust developers for being good developers anymore? And is it still worth getting games on launch day, especially games of this style, because of how many issues we've seen in recent games coming from developers that have had really good histories? This came from BioWare. We had Red Dead Redemption 2, which I know that's a controversial pick, but I'll explain that one in a second. And then we had Fallout 76 with like Bethesda, and like Red Dead Redemption 2, I know that it was a really well received game, but I've also heard a fair number of nitpicks about the fact that they almost took it too far into the cowboy simulator thing, like extremely detailed, in that you have to go through the game motions and everything of removing the saddles and such to put them back on and that type of crap. And then Fallout 76, I mean, everybody knows what happened with that. It was kind of this everything from the pre-order bonuses being different than told about, then it was buggy as heck, not the game people were expecting, and whatnot, and then obviously what's going on with Anthem right now.
I think you raise a very interesting viewpoint there about should we trust the developers anymore. But do you think this is more of an internal issue with the developers themselves or something else?
Well, for starters, I think it has with Anthem and that type of game. First off, when you go from a small in-house test of say 500 to 1,000 people at most, or even some of the smaller scale testing, which usually they can't even do until the game's mostly finished to begin with, which doesn't leave a lot of room for bug fixing, then you're talking about the point where you can't like fully test run it, because a game like Anthem, you're having literally millions of people on your servers at once, which of course is going to expose all kinds of bugs because, well, a lot of gamers look for bugs in games like that to begin with, so they're literally looking to make you look bad in a lot of ways, even if they are just doing it for fun. That's kind of another result of that. And then on top of that, just that amount of people is going to increase load times. It's going to cause server issues. It's going to cause crashes. But then looking at the developer side of things, part of me almost wonders if some of these because like everyone I just listed there is major developers, and obviously there are plenty of indie flaws as well. Sometimes I wonder if these developers are really trying to push games a little too far at points, if that makes any sense.
What do you mean by that? Like, try to bite off more than they can chew?
Yeah, yeah, because it seems like a lot of these games, I mean, like for Fallout 76, for example, Bethesda's really buckling down on that and starting to add a lot of new content they have planned for this year that, at least to the best of my knowledge, is going to be free. And it sounds like they're trying to fix it, but at the same time, this is the same problem I feel like we've seen with games recently. I mean, Titanfall is a perfect example of what comes to mind, where it's sort of like we get this really good game that's supposed to be huge, right? So in theory, we have this shell. It's kind of not fully fleshed out, and then by a time we have like a year go by with the game, then it's what we were looking for in the first place. And just kind of my question becomes, are they biting off too much that they can chew to reach a certain deadline, and should we just let these games be delayed, a la what happened with Metroid on the Switch? Or is it just that this is kind of the nature of the era we live in terms of online play, and then bugs obviously being exploited along with that?
Yeah, this is very interesting because we're at the point now where a game can be altered after it is purchased via an update patch. And of course, a lot of companies now are getting criticized for essentially releasing half of the game on launch and then sort of piping in the rest through updates.
Right, and I guess my biggest problem is sometimes those aren't even free updates. Like they turn into, okay, we gave you like kind of the game, and then if you want the full story, you got to buy this DLC pack. Give us $20, please. Like that part of it kind of irks me, and I guess it kind of raises it goes back to my original point of, is it still worthwhile getting games day one when we're seeing problems like this arise, when we're seeing it that these major developers that are supposed to be trustworthy aren't always hitting home runs? I mean, that's always been the case, but when you're in an era where a lot of these games that come out aren't even necessarily complete, and the ones that are good usually end up getting game of the year remakes at some point with all the DLC bundled in with no additional cost, it just becomes a question to me of, is that day one thing really still worth it?
And then, of course, you have a fork in the road there. You have a split because when you're talking about a day one release, there's the physical version and the digital download version.
Exactly. And then there, obviously there's its own issues with that because physical versions sometimes with pre-orders they end up running out of
Hmm.
stock if you don't pre-order it and everything else. So we're at a weird crossroads. We're at a really weird crossroads with that. And obviously being a physical person I always lean towards that side of things, but still
Uh-huh.
I I just don't know, man. I don't know if that whole pre-order thing. Like, I'm still gonna pre-order games, and I know I will. But there's part of me that in my back of my head's kind of like, is this really worth it? Especially for these online heavy games where I feel like you're kind of getting your foot in the door and testing it for them. You're like their first large scale test.
Yeah, in terms of from a monetary standpoint, it's rarely ever worth it, especially if the game doesn't have some sort of exclusive day one either DLC or extra perks along with it.
Precisely. I mean, then you can kind of argue from the other side as well that part of enjoying a game is watching it evolve and grow and kind of growing along with it as a player. I mean, for example, if you're looking at World of Warcraft, well, I don't have a ton of experience with that game. I can easily tell you the game that when it launched compared to today is literally not the same game. Like, you've watched that change and grow over time and like morph to fit its player base. Now, granted, World of Warcraft's also been around a lot longer and survived a lot longer than most MMOs probably ever will, but still.
That's true. I've seen sort of the same thing happen with a game I've always liked, which is Team Fortress 2.
Right.
Now, do you think it could be justified, the whole day one thing, by essentially claiming that you're paying the extra price, however it may be, whether it be monetary or otherwise, to experience the game earlier or ahead of everyone else?
And that's kind of another question, especially considering like people like us like to do these casual like podcast types of things, and being able to stay up to date on the news is a big part of that. And I think that is part of what you're paying for, and story driven games, which are a lot of what we play. I mean, I know you
Hmm.
and I aren't necessarily the biggest online gamers with a lot of things, and a lot of that also comes from the fact that we're usually 5 years behind. But still, throwing in with that, it's kind of, it prevents you from getting those spoilers because you're experiencing it at the same rate as everybody else versus, I am extremely lucky I'm not aware of the supposedly huge plot twist in Final Fantasy VII when I've yet to play it.
Ooh, me neither.
Yeah,
I
exactly. So it's like,
I played
if
the
you get
first
that,
part of it.
yeah, if you get the day one experience, then you're kind of managing to avoid all that. So it's just a big question in the air. It's kind of a pros cons thing, and I guess this issue has
Exactly.
always existed. Just with a lot of these more recent games, I think it's come to light a little bit more.
Exactly. It has definitely been amplified with the whole newer development cycles taking hold.
Right, and part of me actually thinks this is a little bit healthy for the market because it is making it so games, I think, are gradually getting to a point where they don't necessarily sell quite as well as they used to just based off a brand name.
Hmm. Yeah, that's true. The indie market has, of course, exploded, and it could probably be taking chunks of the traditional market with it.
Right, and especially when these developers aren't always getting the home runs they used to. I mean, just these past couple of weeks, we've had things like Anthem, and a couple months ago, we had things like Fallout 76. We had the game Crackdown 3, which was supposed to be a huge deal, and everything I've heard about that is lukewarm reception. So it's like, once more, I'm not hating on the major developers. I love me some AAA games. But
Hmm.
at the same time, it's like, okay, this is probably good because it challenges them. It challenges them to be innovative and need to keep pushing themselves and make sure their product is as quality as possible.
I definitely know that there has been an argument for a very long time that pre-ordering stuff and getting it day one isn't worth it. So hopefully in the future we can see these developers try and step up their game a little bit.
Right, right. And once more, not a criticism. The people behind these games do a great job. And I get that.
Hmm.
It's just like the whole idea of the day one thing. And, maybe even raising the point of if you do like day one, maybe you even, like, I don't want to say a discount, but maybe they make early accesses a little bit more open to the player base. That way they can help them find the bugs. And if you're willing to participate in the early access, you can get more of a discount on games. Because a lot of times the early access stuff is extremely limited and restricted to who it's open to.
Very true.
So that's just kind of one idea that comes in mind. That way, it's more of like a coherent, cooperative experience to develop that game together between the community and the devs. Then the devs offer it to the players still are paying the devs, but then they're working together to find the problems with the games.
Sort of open source testing.
Right, right. And I don't think that would be entirely a bad idea. I mean, that's more or less what Minecraft did.
Hmm.
And it turned out pretty well for the most part. I mean, most of the bugs in Minecraft back in the day weren't game breaking. They were like, oh, I can duplicate this thing by having my friend open a furnace and then rapidly move the item in and out while I break the furnace, and then it explodes with a bunch of blocks worth of that item, or something stupid like that. But yeah,
Oh, they left Herobrine in.
yeah, exactly. Like, oh, Herobrine's now only if you get to the, below bedrock or something stupid like that. But yeah, that's just kind of a general point that I've noticed with things. On with another major release, and speaking of early accesses, because this is only kind of a release, it's more of a half beta test, half release. Smite, which is a massive MOBA that's been giving League of Legends a pretty good run for its money here lately, has been ported to the Nintendo Switch. Once more, it's kind of in a beta phase in that you have to get the developers pack or whatever it's called, which is about $30 to have access to it now, but that comes with all kinds of extra DLC and such. And from what I hear, it's running pretty well. How do you feel about getting like essentially a PC game ported to the Switch?
Oh, that is fantastic news, in my opinion. A game like that is just perfect for the Switch.
Yeah, and it's really cool, A, because it's portable now. I mean, obviously, some people play it on their
Exactly.
laptops, so they can kind of take it with them anyway, but it's not quite the same kind of feel there. And secondly, you're opening it to a whole new player base. And thirdly, it's crossplay compatible with everything except our good old, hey, I just like to say screw you community because I'm winning, PlayStation.
Whew, boy.
Exactly. But this is really cool. I think it opens the doorway for a lot of things. If you're willing to have a game like Smite on Switch, it's just pushing those doors open even further to, hey, you can bring anything to this console and make it work, at least mostly.
Exactly. This is definitely a point of confidence from that developer as well, especially considering that they've also included some DLC with it.
Yeah, exactly. And they've even have a, I believe it's a Switch exclusive costume, or not costume, skin for a character. I was about to say costume, and I'm like, dude, that's wrong terminology. But still, that's kind of awesome. It's just kind of awesome to see that this console is able to do what it is. So with that being the case, we did have a couple other major releases this week. I'm not going to sum up all of them, but a couple that stood out were we obviously Smite on Switch. Then we had Yakuza Kiwami, Realms of Arcanica, Star Trail, and Bannerman for the PC. Full list of these types of things can usually be found on IGN and such there. So this is really good opportunities for the Switch. We got some neat stuff going on with Anthem, hopefully, eventually, if they polish that up. Let's go ahead and move on to some other major overall news for the week, not necessarily related to game releases. First off being Xbox Game Pass coming to Switch. Now, I briefly covered this in a Newbark News episode earlier in the week, but I usually only kind of do news flash types of things there. This is insane.
It's insanely good news for me, considering I have an Xbox One already.
That's true. And Xbox Game Pass does offer some pretty good deals and some pretty great games, especially considering most of their recent first party games are going straight to Game Pass.
That is incredible. How do you think this is going to work with the Nintendo Switch?
So, from my understanding, it's essentially the whole idea of you're going to have these processors put inside a massive building that are essentially all like Xbox One X's or whatever, and you're streaming it to your Switch. So the Switch isn't natively running these games. It's basically a streaming service to the Switch to allow you to play these games portably.
That is true. That has been tried with the Switch in the past. And considering that Xbox is trying to move itself towards more of a service, that is not an unlikely possibility.
Right, and part of me wonders if they're almost exploiting the fact that the Switch is so popular and that they're kind of working with Nintendo anyway to sort of use the Switch as their test dummy before they launch the Xbox Scarlet or whatever it's going to be called because once more we've seen them before kind of push towards that no disk drive thing. I wonder if this is kind of their test run to see how everything will operate on another person's console. That way if it flops, it doesn't make them look quite as bad necessarily. And if it works, then it's like, okay, we've got the go ahead. People like this. We're just going to cut the disk drive all digital from here on, boys.
Phew, no.
I hope that's not the case. I hope they aren't exploiting the fact that they seem to be on good terms with Nintendo right now, but we'll certainly see. Now, this to me just pushes once more in that direction that we talked about a couple weeks ago that we were actually kind of painting as this will never happen, but let's discuss it anyway type of image of Xbox and Nintendo working together. Because along with this, we've also gotten a series of rumors about some of the major Xbox first-party titles and exclusives coming to Switch, and a couple of them have already been confirmed, including Cuphead and Ori and the Blind Forest.
Well, that is very good. I have been wanting to play Cuphead for a very long time.
Oh, dude, I've heard fantastic things about that game. Apparently, it's literally just living inside a Saturday morning cartoon.
From the 1930s.
Exactly. But yeah, some of these rumors are circulating around like much more major titles like Halo, Forza, and Gears of War. Now, one thing I should probably point out about this is, to the best of my knowledge, the technical capabilities don't exist on the Switch system to outright run the versions of these games that you play on your Xbox, because the Xbox is much more powerful than the Switch, and not just purely graphically.
I know in-home streaming has been a thing for a while with Microsoft, aka Windows 10. That's something that you can do. I wouldn't be surprised if that was something that they would want to do with the Nintendo Switch.
That's possible. It could almost work like the PlayStation Remote Play, only instead of a Vita, you're
Mm-hmm.
using a Switch.
Exactly.
And that could be pretty cool. The other option I could see is like the rumors circulating about these games is perhaps they're going to bring them to the Game Pass service and then you just directly stream them to the Switch from there.
That is definitely possible.
But this is kind of crazy to me just because this is showing so much cooperation between the two companies. It
Do you think that they could actually work together more directly to try and take down Sony?
That's the question that's starting to be spun in my head because my understanding is right now, at least from a development standpoint, it looks like Xbox is really leaning into the streaming service thing. And it
Mm-hmm.
seems to me almost like they're trying to be still a first party company, but also trying to be one of the most major third party developers at the same time, when I feel like those two don't really go hand in hand. That's like the equivalent of going back to the 16-bit era and Sega being like, yeah, we're going to keep putting out the Genesis, but we're going to take our Sonic games and port them to the Super Nintendo too. Like, that, something about that just seems off to me. It's an interesting business approach, but
I mean, don't you think it would be very lucrative though for them?
it could be. I think the problem that you run into with a situation like that is then what is the draw of your console over another one? If all of your games that are supposed, or the majority of them at least, that are supposed to be exclusive and are supposed to distinguish your console, are also available on all of your competitors' systems.
That's the thing. I don't think they're looking to draw them to their console necessarily. As long as you get Game Pass from Microsoft or Xbox, which is, I guess, now their gaming brand as a whole, as long as you have that, that's really all they need. You can play that on whatever you want.
True, but if that's the case, then we have to wonder what's the point in continuing the Xbox service.
The service itself,
Or I'm sorry, not the
well,
service, the systems.
oh, well, probably just as a hub to run the games.
Fair. I think it's an odd point, and like you said, about them directly working together, I'm not sure. What I could kind of see happening is the fact that Nintendo has, in their history at least, generally been known for having the weakest online capabilities, right? So
Hmm.
maybe what we see sort of develop here is we've talked before about how the fact that the portable market is kind of dying out. And the portable market's been something that Microsoft's never really delved a whole lot into. So what we see is these companies sort of interacting with each other a lot more. And they're both using kind of Microsoft's online power, but the Switch kind of turns into the portable equivalent of the Xbox in some ways. The closest thing to a portable equivalent you're going to get, and it's being made by another company but has access to most of your Xbox services. And then at home you can do all your Xbox stuff on the console. And this is where I kind of draw the line. What's really weird to me about this is I could never see Nintendo taking like Zelda games and porting them to the Xbox.
I don't think it's going to work the other way around.
Right. So then the question kind of wraps back to why is like Microsoft, I get it. You're making your money off the Game Pass, but why are you just like are you going to be porting all these first party things that are supposed to distinguish you? Like you're making the money, but at the same time I can't really get past the fact of if I can just play all the games I would play on my Xbox on either my Switch or on my
Well,
PC, why am
we
I getting
don't
the Xbox?
know we don't know that they're going to be porting all their exclusives. Perhaps they're just going to be porting the things that can run on the Switch. Again, we really don't know how this is going to work, if streaming is going to be involved at all. If you get the Game Pass, perhaps only the weaker Xbox games will be able to run on the Switch.
This is true. This is true. I
And
just
we've
this is just
also
mind-boggling. Go ahead.
yeah, the other things that this was supposed to be ported to are, remember, Android and iOS.
Right.
So what you're saying about them reaching into the portable market does sort of make sense.
Yeah, just I don't know. I'm just surprised that they aren't. I guess what's surprising me is I feel like they aren't necessarily asking for all that much in return from Nintendo, but I guess they don't really need to at the same time.
That's what I think. For them, it's very lucrative because someone who doesn't own an Xbox One could potentially just buy a Game Pass and then have access to some of those games on the Switch.
Right, so you're sort of separating the markets between the two rather than making them need to be like go together.
Exactly.
So here's going to be my question for you. What do you think this may mean for the future of Nintendo's online service?
That is an interesting one because I doubt that Microsoft will be willing to share their multiplayer online infrastructure specifically. But I think Nintendo's Switch Online still has a lot of potential. The main controversies surrounding it are simply based on value because Nintendo is not willing to give any sort of discounts for those who have the, I guess, premium membership that you just get some NES games. But as a whole, the online service doesn't seem that bad, at least from my end. I've played a lot of Mario Kart and Smash through it, and I've never had many noteworthy problems.
I'm kind of with you on that. I think its biggest lacking point right now is it doesn't have a super good party system, from my understanding, similar to how you can set up like an Xbox Live party or whatever. So I guess my biggest point to that thing is if Microsoft's whole thing is that they're trying to make it so that their online services are kind of a separate product that you don't need to buy into the Xbox like console brand in order to be able to experience, wouldn't it make sense for them to somehow offer like reach out to Nintendo and be like, hey, we'll take over the online service thing. You don't need to run it anymore. We'll operate the servers and such. You just got to make sure we're getting the profits. So we'll take that weight off your shoulders, but that money's going to be going to us now. Like that's
We
a deal
both
I could
know
almost see them going.
no, we both know Nintendo is not willing to let that happen. They've been very protective over their assets in the past, and I don't think they're willing to just surrender the entirety of their online, uh, basically backbone to Microsoft.
Fair, fair. Then once more, that just makes this more complicated because then I'm asking myself again, like, why are you cooperating with them for the Game Pass thing? Like that.
Like I said, I think it's to so that they can sell more Game Passes and reach more people,
Right, right, but
because
why
the
is
costs.
Nintendo working with them on that part if they're unwilling to on the line? That's where it just keeps confusing me because I agree with you. I agree with you on both points, but there's part of them that seems to contradict.
So what were you saying? You were confused about?
So it's sort of like okay, you're absolutely right. They don't seem like they're likely to surrender their online, right? To go off say Microsoft
Mhm.
servers. But they've already shown that they're willing to allow the Game Pass to run on there and some form of Xbox Live services to run on there.
Oh,
So
so you're
then this
confused about why Nintendo is the one who's letting Xbox do
right,
this.
right, right. So what I'm getting at is this there seems to be this very gray dividing line on there and it's just
Okay.
kind of like where is this clear cut? That's what keeps like kind of
I
confusing me
I
and spinning me in
may
circles.
I may have some insight on this. One of the reasons the Switch didn't launch immediately with things like YouTube and Netflix, and we still don't have Netflix on it, is because Nintendo wanted the Switch to be seen as sort of a strictly gaming device, not just like another iPad that can run Zelda, because that's not what it was meant to be. It's meant to be marketed as something that is strictly for gaming. By having I guess a brand. I'm not even sure what to call Xbox at this point because if it's their gaming brand or whatever. But
It's an
having
art
that so
project.
oh god, at this point, what at this point, why wouldn't it be? But anyway, having something like that attached to the Switch and having it run on the Switch, and then having the potential to include those exclusive hardcore Xbox games on the Switch, that really speaks volumes for Nintendo's Switch being a step like a very strong gaming platform as opposed to something like an iPad.
I guess I can see where you're coming from there, and we're just gonna have to wait and see how this plays out, obviously. But just something about it
Hmm.
just seems like it's trying to say one thing, and part of it's saying another, and it's kind of like they have a foot half in the door. And I guess that's what bothers me in some ways. But oh well, it's the nature of the market, I suppose. So moving right along here, another big piece of topic for this week, and this has kind of been an ongoing story, is the fact that PlayStation is continuing to file for multiple patents that seem to imply the PlayStation 5 may be really backwards compatible. The most recent of which includes filing a patent that's supposed to allow for the buses within the system to operate similar to that of legacy consoles, which once more kind of writes off to that whole backwards compatibility thing. So, how would you feel about this, especially as someone who I know recently bought another PS3 Fat?
Yeah, my whole thing has always been, what does Sony mean by backwards compatibility? Because remember when the PS4 launched, they claimed that it had backwards compatibility, but the only quote unquote backwards compatibility they included was the potential to rebuy your PS3 games for the PS4.
Exactly, and not even all of them are available.
Exactly. I don't know the specifics. Of course, well, I guess no one knows the specifics for what the PS5's backwards compatibility will look like. Is it just backwards compatible with PS4 or etc.? We don't really know, but I do hope that it works out for them somehow because any form of backwards compatibility is still backwards compatible in the long run.
So I guess here's my question to you: with Nintendo and Microsoft getting closer and closer together in kind of the console war, and kind of not directly collaborating, but getting to a point where it's obvious they aren't really fighting one another at this point, if that makes any sense. Do you
Mm.
think if Sony secures this backwards compatibility, say you can play every PlayStation game, PlayStations 1 through 5 on your PlayStation 5, do you think they can beat this growing alliance between Nintendo and Xbox?
No, but I think I'll be buying a PS5.
That's exactly what that was my next question. Is like, as somebody who went Xbox this generation, is this going to sway you to the other side?
Yeah, see, my two things have always been backwards compatibility and free online. That was why I was such a big supporter of the Wii U when it launched, and apparently literally no one else values those things. So that's why we've seen both of them die out this generation, essentially completely. No one offers free online, and the backwards compatibility that is offered is lackluster at best.
True, and I will give you this much: the Xbox One does backwards compatibility, whereas the other two don't, and it actually does it
Hmm.
pretty well. Like, it runs the majority of your original Xbox games, even, which is
Exactly.
awesome.
I love being able to pop in Morrowind into my Xbox One and have that. It's always been really cool.
Right, or for me, like a couple weeks back, was recording some footage of Star Wars Republic Commando, which is like one of these offshoot titles that not a lot of people even necessarily own, but it's still compatible, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's sort of more along the lines of how you do backwards compatibility, but it's still somewhat flawed compared to the PS3. I think what it is that no other console has ever done it as well as the fat PS3 has, and I've just been spoiled by that, and that's what I expect now. So that could be part of it, but I mean, backwards compatibility to me still always is just you throw the disc from the previous system in the thing and it plays it.
I'm right there with you, and my honest belief is I could see Sony doing this. I know they've kind of been not very good with the whole backwards compatibility thing in recent years here, but that company's been swaying a lot more into their gaming division because they've been watching their other divisions of the company kind of start to fall by the wayside to some extent. So with that
Mm.
being the case, they've been throwing more and more money into the whole PlayStation brand, and I think, or at least I'm hoping, maybe they're starting to acknowledge, wait a second, these PS3 fats are like over 10 or like 10ish years plus old at this point, and they're still selling for a much better price than the slim and the super slim, both of which were actually reliable consoles, whereas the fat was like an unreliable piece of crap. Don't get me wrong, I love it, but at the same
No, you're
time,
perfectly valid. I have gone through like three of them. You are so valid.
yeah,
But
but it still fetches a higher price even though people know it's
hmm
probably going to break.
that's why that's why I bought one with the warranty. Yep. But as we were saying, I do think that legacy is something that Sony values inherently. They've always been harkening back and releasing collections of their biggest hits and things like that. It's definitely not out of the realm of the possibility for them to do that and then for me to buy a PS5.
Honestly, man, if this thing turns out that PlayStation 5 is fully backwards compatible, I think you're going to see me jump fully on board onto the PlayStation ship. Like
Oh, dude, same.
I've always been the guy who's kind of like teetered back and forth between PlayStation and Nintendo. During the 360 era, I was on board with Microsoft for a while, but it was sheerly because my friends were there. I still didn't like the 360 as a console. Like if somebody asked me what's your favorite
Yeah.
console this generation, I'd be like, I hate the Xbox, but I play on it because I want to play with my friends.
I could go on a rant about why I hate the 360, but we'll save that for later.
Yeah, we'll make a whole podcast about no. Honestly, I feel like that would be a good analytical video one day. Like, this is why the 360 shouldn't have done well, but it did for some reason.
I know.
that would
Oh
be
man.
that would be fantastic. But yeah, enough about the PlayStation 5 speculation. That's
Hmm.
hype inducing. Let's get on to the kind of what's been probably the biggest story of the week in terms of video game news, and that's the fact that Reggie, current president of Nintendo of America, has announced he is retiring in April of this year. And this man is responsible for basically single-handedly changing the way North America views Nintendo as a company, or at the very least providing an alternative perspective as to how you view them. And it's just
Hmm.
insane to think about this guy retiring. I mean, this is the guy who stepped onto the platform, and I believe the year was 2004, and he says, "My name's Reggie. I'm about kicking ass, I'm about taking names, and we're about playing games." Coming to you from Nintendo, who at that point compared to everybody else was branded as the super conservative family market, and this guy steps on stage and just shatters that with 3 lines of dialogue. You're like, heck yeah, I own a GameCube. Screw you, PlayStation. Screw you, Xbox. Like, that was your cheering moment. If you were somebody who was like an older teenager or whatever who was still behind the GameCube, you're like, yeah, that's our mascot. This Reggie guy, he's gonna lead us into the future.
Of course, I don't have any memory of that because 2004 I was in kindergarten.
Right, yeah. Hey, we same boat, but I still have that feeling. Like rewatching that clip in retrospect, it's kind of like, whoa. Just just sort of to put some perspective on that, or even like when the DS and the PlayStation Portable were battling it out, right? We're a couple
Mm.
years into the DS's sales, Reggie was talking about, oh yeah, we reached 5 million units, and some of you are going to be like, yeah, but the PSP hasn't went in Europe yet, and his thing was, yeah, it's not my problem that we got our console there when we were supposed to, and Sony hasn't done it yet. Like, this guy is
Mm.
not afraid to diss the other companies. And just once more, it's the idea that Nintendo isn't this straight up play by the books type of player, and to have that alternative view to them was really cool. And but at the same time, he was really approachable and friendly on
What's
stage.
What's funny to me is that that persona you describe as, being able to almost slander the competition was always something that Sony had done back when the first PlayStation released. Like when you look at their ads from that time period, they had at one point a guy dressed as Crash Bandicoot going up there with a megaphone in front of Nintendo headquarters and yelling at them.
Exactly. But I love the fact that Reggie kind of was like, all right, you want to throw some shade? I'm going to throw it right back. And I'm going to be the friendliest guy on stage at the same time doing it. I'm going to get up there. I'm going to make some stupid faces with my Wii U camera. I'm going to do a me fight with Miyamoto or whatever. And we're going to do some great things.
His body truly was ready.
Oh, yeah. For that Wii Fit board, you bet. And like, it's just really cool. It's sad to see him retire, but I'm happy for him because I think he did some amazing things to the brand. Yeah, he was around for the Wii U, which ended up flopping, but he's also a pretty good reason why the Wii, which objectively speaking was absolutely inferior hardware to its two competitors, outsold both of them.
What you do have to realize is that hardware inferiority is rarely ever a cause for a game system doing poorly.
This is true.
I
This is
think,
true.
yeah, I think every single console generation, I think there might have been one where it wasn't the case, but every single console generation other than that one, the the dominant platform was the one with weaker hardware.
This is true. A lot of it does have to do with the games, but still,
Hmm.
like the thing that kind of resonates to me with about that is during that console generation, when I was speaking with a lot of my friends and such, within a year or two of the Wii coming out, a lot of them were just hating on the Wii. But what was interesting was because of their successful marketing, because of the kind of image it generated, which once more I think does have to pour back into Reggie to some extent. Even the people who hated it still owned a Wii, And like, if I talked to them, a lot of times they'd still played it within the past 2 weeks, even though they wanted to hate on it so badly.
Well, different demographics. Probably their parents have bought it, but I mean, we both know that they secretly did love the Wii. They just wanted to act like they didn't because it was the quote unquote baby console.
Right, right. And I think this kind of is going to segue well into what it's going to be our main topic for the day is what has it been like being a Nintendo fan over the past 20-ish years or so? Because let's be honest here, man, it's been a bit of a crazy roller coaster with this company for a bit.
It certainly has.
I mean, I think
Just
we've
like our lives.
exactly. I think we've reached a nice high again with them, but for a while we were riding pretty low.
Oh, yeah, you have no idea how weird it is to see Nintendo doing this well. Like, to have them be almost the dominant hardware or the dominant platform in this round is just shocking to me.
It's crazy. So like let
It's something that I see because, as you were saying, even when the Wii was doing well, no one in our demographic liked it. No one
exactly.
thought it was like quote unquote the console. So even when it was doing well sales wise, popularity wise, it it was floundering.
I know, but as like and as you said, to see Nintendo doing this well, now if you're walking in the street or you're like sitting in like, I don't know, a McDonald's or whatever, and you're like playing Switch with your friend, people are walking up to you like, bro, you have a Switch? Dude, that's awesome. Can I play some Mario Kart with? And it's like, what is this? And let's go ahead and like kind of rewind. That's the word I'm looking for. A little bit, and we'll catch up to the modern day. So, what was the first Nintendo console you really got started with?
The one that's always been my favorite, the Nintendo 64. Growing
Ours.
up, I never had a GameCube.
Hmm.
Never. Everyone else had the GameCube. I was still just like get in or get out. Like I was I was not phased at all by that thing. But I yeah I didn't get a GameCube until well no I didn't get GameCube support until I got my Wii, which was like 2007. So yeah, my experience has always been with the N64, and of course other portables. I was a huge Game Boy freak back then. I had to have all the different Game Boys.
Oh
So
yes.
yeah, that was definitely another part of it. Um, yeah, that's basically been my Nintendo experience. I was really hooked on the N64, the Super Mario 64. I really liked Hey You Pikachu when I was younger.
Oh, dude, that
Uh,
game was the crap.
Apparently it's bad, but I'm just gonna ignore everything about that because no, it wasn't bad. It was amazing.
It's just because we
Uh,
have nostalgia goggles, but yes, it definitely was amazing.
okay, no, how was it not amazing? I'm gonna debate you here. That game, you could talk into the microphone, you could collect these like little objects and put them around your room and throw them around and have Pikachu run after them. I
That's
mean,
true, and the mini
how was
games
that
were
not?
pretty cool.
How was that not awesome?
Okay, I'll give you this one. It's a fun experience. If I'm
I
trying
mean,
to like put it objectively, I can see where people would say it's not a very good game, but it's fun if you sit down and play it.
I think what it is that of course when I was playing this I was like 8. Like of course I thought it was amazing,
That's
but
true. That's true.
yeah, I haven't really. I guess to go on your side for a little bit, I haven't like really sat down and played it in a while.
Right, right. I mean, and that kind of gets to the point of I think if you take a super hyper analytical scope to Pokemon, it may not be as good as everyone says it is. Like Jason and I were actually talking about this the other day, but that's way too controversial not to like make a separate footage segment about it. But yeah, I'm actually in a
Mhm.
similar boat to you in that like I started out with the N64. I was growing up with that thing. I got a
Nice.
GameCube relatively early on, but I was a lot more attached to my Nintendo 64 because like some of my favorite memories were gathering around with like four people and playing the original Mario Party games on that. And
Oh yeah.
eventually we have evolved in doing it on the GameCube, but like I remember where I used to play it at one of my friends' houses, it was kind of like we didn't have access to the GameCube because that was like the premium system of the time, so we weren't necessarily trusted to play it versus the N6. And I mean it was fair. We were pretty young, so it was like we didn't want to break it or
Mhm.
whatever. So we were using the N64 and whatnot, and it was a blast, dude. Like four people around on the console. The graphics were in 3D. It was really really cool. And like I owned a PlayStation 1 at home, but I never touched the thing. The N64 was my jam. Then by the time we got into the GameCube era, like I played some of the games, I had some fun with them. It was mainly restricted to Mario Party and like Melee. I've come back and had a little bit more appreciation for the games in recent years. I still want to get around to playing some of them, but I feel like some of those games are probably in that back catalog section to the point where they've been sitting for so long I may never actually touch them, even if I keep telling myself I eventually will. And then the Wii fell at like a really interesting point for me. Where did this fall for you? We'll get into the where I fell with it in a second.
What do you mean at an interesting point?
Like in terms of your development with like the games of Nintendo and everything else, like where were you when you
Oh,
got your Wii in terms of what you were playing and such?
uh, probably I'd say Uh, I was still just I was still where I was when I first fell in love with Nintendo. I was still playing the Pokemon games on the Game Boy. I was still doing like Pokemon Stadium, Mario Party, Smash
Pokemon
Bros.
Stadium.
All the original good N64 stuff. I was still riding on that high. And then of course when the Wii starts gaining traction, of course I'm like, oh man, another Nintendo console? Hell yeah, bring that over here. So it was just more of what I loved. I played Mario Galaxy. I had the original Paper Mario on N64, and of course, I immediately got Super Paper Mario for the Wii. Like, I was just continuing basically where I left off.
Riding that hype wave. And the Wii for me, I think is actually where I started to fall off a little bit. If I'm gonna be honest with you.
Really?
I okay, I loved the console when I first got it. I still remember it to this day. I was coming home from my grandmother's house and sitting there like in a box. My dad came home or my dad beat us home. And he had the Nintendo Wii sitting there with Mario Kart. I could not be more hyped. Like we were doing motion controls. I spent like the next 4 hours in front of my TV playing this thing. It was the best experience in the world. But then, like within a couple months of that, I started to fell off the Wii just because the motion controls weren't really clicking with me. I didn't like it a ton. I was sort of leaning towards just kind of playing my PlayStation 2. That was kind of where I really started to lean into the PlayStation 2 a lot. I was playing games like Ratchet and Clank and such. And then by the time I kind of understood how good of a library the Wii really had, including games like Super Mario Galaxy, that type of stuff. Just to name one off the top of my head, I'm kind of blanking on the library. I know there's a lot more. Um, but by the time I started to realize that, it was around that time where we were dealing with a demographic that was like, the Wii sucks. Why would you play the Wii? Dude, you played freaking Skyward Sword? That game is crap. What are you doing? Like, why would you pay $60 for a Wii game? That thing sucks. Go get COD. Like, and at that
Yeah,
point, it was kind of like, do I want to play with my friends or do I want to play my Nintendo games?
I didn't have friends, so I just played my Nintendo games. The game,
Good choice.
I know, right? The library I had for the Wii, I didn't like. I think the thing is, I was very neutral on the motion controls because my library didn't include a lot of games that had a focus on motion controls. The only one I can really think of is Wii Play. That's it. Like the other ones are just like Super Paper Mario. You don't really do anything with the motion controls. Um, what about New Super Mario Brothers Wii? You shake it sometimes. Eh.
Right,
And
and I think part of me is actually forgetting this because like now that you're mentioning, it, I'm like, oh yeah, there was that time where I got Brawl. How did I not mention Brawl? Like, dude, that was one of the main reasons I was hyped for a Wii. Like, I remember after I got the Wii, that was the only thing. Like, I couldn't even fully enjoy Mario Kart after those first few hours because all I kept thinking about is when am I gonna get Brawl? When am I gonna get Brawl? When am I gonna get Brawl? Because like a couple weeks before that, I had played Subspace Emissary for the first time on the Wii, and I was, this is the crap. You have a story mode in Smash Brothers. What? Like,
mind blown.
exactly. And like you mentioned, there were a lot of really good games that didn't use the motion control, but I guess part
Hmm.
of me didn't fully get past the stigma of, oh, well, if I have a game, it's gonna have motion controls. I was like overly
Hmm.
generalizing that to some
It
extent.
was tainted.
Yeah, it was a tainted viewpoint on things. But at the same time, the thing I also started to notice as I eventually delved into that 360 thing for a while was none of the other consoles were really sporting couch co-op all that well at that point. Versus the Wii, like there were so many hours I used to spend in friends' basements where there were like three of us in front of the TV, either playing like Mario Kart 64 from the old days, the newer Mario Kart games, some weird compilation games we found or whatever, all on the Wii, and it was some of my favorite memories from that time.
Yeah, we could do a whole separate video on like the decline of couch co-op, but we're not gonna go into that now. But it just has Nintendo's thing has always been the couch co-op, basically.
And they did it incredibly with the Wii. Like in
Hmm.
retrospect, that console was designed for that because it was so approachable with the motion controls and everything. It was just like encouraging. Like you,
Exactly.
it was like, hey, you've never played a game before? Cool, let's play some Wii Sports. We're gonna do bowling. Like you need to know like two buttons, and you need to know how to do a little bit of motion, and it was great because you could just get people hooked right there. It
Yeah, I
was
definitely think that was one of the things that made it approachable because it's like you never seen a game controller? Fine, here's a remote. Just wave it around. There you go.
right. And then let's go ahead and delve into the portables for a second because we've kind of been ignoring this. I don't know about you, but I wasn't even really aware the PSP existed until like 5 years after it came out.
I had like seen some teenagers with it and then just been like, ew, that's the Sony portable.
Yeah, that's the
Like,
perfect one.
what what games are you don't have Pokemon? Get out of here.
Dude, you can't play Mario Kart on that? Screw that crap. Like, that
that's
was.
basically that's basically been my only experience with it. Just like, ew, why do you have that?
Yeah, I mean, like, in retrospect, part of me is like, dude, I wish I would have gotten a PSP quicker. Not because I dislike the DS, I wish I would have had both for a longer period of time. Because the PSP was a really good system. But I feel
Oh
like
yeah,
it.
in retrospect, I and even like right now, dude, I love my PSP.
That's one of the. Like, PSP and PS2, I'm real. And Vita, obviously. I'm really after collecting games for right now. Like, dude, I want to go hard on just filling out my collection there. But
Oh
in
yeah.
terms of the Nintendo portables, it was like the DS I thought was equally as universal of an experience. Much like the Wii, where even though it had its haters, everybody still had one. The DS was
Hmm.
kind of the same boat. Like you look to your left and you look to your right, the odds are at least 80% of the people you're looking at either have a DS or have like a sibling that has a DS that they played on a decent amount. And then like Mario Kart, you had 10 people in a room, you could probably get at least a 6-person game going.
What's funny is that I actually have this memory from first grade when the DS was set to come out soon. I was, of course, with my Game Boy and everything, and the DS to me was like very foreign. Just like it was a bigger Game Boy that had two screens. I was like, what is this?
Right.
That kind of looks dumb. And my one friend came up to me and he was like, hey, my brother's gonna be getting this, and I was just like, oh, I don't know. It has a Y button. That's weird, right? You don't want
Yeah.
to play
It has
something
more than
that
it,
has a Y button.
it has more than two buttons that aren't shoulder buttons. Like,
Ew.
yeah, I know,
No.
right? Too complicated, man. Too complicated. But yeah, and I think some of that is a part of Nintendo's marketing because initially the DS was supposed to run parallel to the Game Boy Advance rather than, ending up
Well,
succeeding
it's
it.
always just been Nintendo being very cautious. They don't want to commit to something if they think it's going to fail, if they think people will be off-putted by its Y button.
Right. And I think one of the things that I don't think we grasped because of the age demographic we were in was
Mm.
part of the appeal of the DS was the fact that this was a time where you really didn't see many touchscreen devices. And here
Yeah,
was the DS
at
with
around
like
that
an
around that
affordable
era,
touchscreen.
like a fad with technology almost was to just slap a touchscreen on it. Of
Right.
course, when they weren't even good, and they were never good until very recently.
But what's interesting is the DS touchscreen, like I still own an original model DS, works really well. Like it's
Doesn't look very well, I
yeah, but
bet.
okay. The original DS though is built like a brick. Like I could chuck that thing at my wall right now and it still work fine. But
That's most Nintendo hardware.
that's fair. But like that's one of the reasons I think their portables do so well is you don't have to worry about breaking them basically.
Oh, that's true. I've dropped my Game Boy Advance SP more times than I can count, and that thing is still trucking hard.
Exactly, and I think that was one of the mind-boggling things was the touchscreen, which made it well, it was another level of accessibility because touchscreens are extremely intuitive. It opened the market for
Mm.
things like PictoChat, and it made certain games a little more accessible to people because it was like, okay, I don't have to learn all these weird button combos. I can just like draw something on the screen or whatever. And adding to that, going back to the couch co-op thing, this is another thing that Nintendo nailed with their multiplayer. Like the idea of going back to Mario Kart, because that's a game that to this day still kind of boggles my mind a little bit. You can have 8 people playing with one game cartridge on a portable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just in retrospect, it's like, wait a second, nobody else has ever done that again.
That's true. No other platform has really done anything like that. At least not with like 10 other adapters that you'd have to buy and like four other controllers and all that other stuff.
Right, and even with the Game Boy Link cables before that, those things worked pretty darn well for the most part. I mean, obviously they were a little clunky in that sometimes they were too short and everything else, but they were pretty cool. I mean, it was multiplayer on the go.
I remember my friends would always have like a different version of the Game Boy, and we never had the right cable. Like
That
we'd have the one that would link two SPs, but he'd have like the original Game Boy Advance, and we'd just be like, well, guess we can't do multiplayer now.
True, true. But it was really cool, but this unfortunately kind of caps off where Nintendo reached their peak for quite some time was with that like DS launch era and then the Wii launch era. They were really soaring high. And kind of going back to the Reggie article, this was kind of the first couple years after he started to gain steam with the company too. And then towards the later half of the Wii lifespan, that's when we really started to see the change of face for a lot of people in how they viewed the Wii. Because they didn't see it in such a positive light anymore. It was either they kind of forgot about it or they hated it.
Hmm.
And I think some of that was kind of reflected in, I don't know the exact sales statistics of it, but I know looking back at like Skyward Sword came towards the end of the Wii's lifespan. And it was a Zelda release. Like this was the first new Zelda release for Wii. I only half count Twilight Princess because that was simultaneously released on the GameCube. This was the first
Mm.
exclusive Zelda game for the Wii. It came towards the end of the lifespan, and I don't remember there being all that much buzz around it. Maybe that was just me, but
I've just always heard that it was bad. Like ever since it was released, just like stay away from that Zelda game. It's
dude,
bad.
really?
Oh yeah.
I love Skyward Sword. That's my
I can
favorite
tell
Zelda
you've
game.
mentioned it like 3 times in this podcast.
It's Skyward Sword, man. The art. To be
Eh,
fair, like I remember that I had one other friend who was getting it at launch day, and he mentioned to me, "Oh yeah, yeah, I'm pre-ordering it. It's gonna be really good. It has the Wii Motion Plus and everything else." And I'm like, "All right, I've played a couple Zelda games at this point. I've never really gotten into a 3D one." And then I read a Game Informer article, and it showed me some of the graphics for that. And to this day, it's still my favorite looking Zelda game. The watercolors, man. Oh my
it does
god.
look good graphically, but I spent like 5 minutes like laughing my head off. Like when it was like raise this like it was when you first got the sword and it was like raise the sword to the light and I'm trying to raise the sword and Link's just like waving it around backward.
Yeehaw!
I was just like, what is this?
Swinging your lasso, partner. No, freaking. I know it had its flaws, but that game resonates so well in my memory. But like back to my point was, I feel like at that point for a Zelda game, there didn't seem to be as much hype as I'm used to.
Well, yeah.
And I felt like that kind of spelled out that era of Nintendo that we started to see with the decline of the Wii and really going into the Wii U era, where it was like,
Mhm.
especially with their home console games, it was like, oh, that's coming out, but I don't really feel
Yeah.
like playing that game system. Or, oh, you need a Wii U? Why would I buy that?
Yeah, again,
Like,
all this, all the hype nowadays for like either like even ports coming to Switch get hype now,
I know,
and
right?
like more hype than like original releases would get for
Dude, they're
3DS.
releasing
And it's like,
Superman 64 for Switch. Get hyped. No.
oh man. But yeah, it's just also foreign to me. I'm always just baffled when I see people like, wait, you're excited for this too?
I know, and but
Really?
if we go into that kind of, I'm gonna call it the dark age. Like I couldn't even get people excited that they were bringing like a new Super Mario Bros. Game to Wii U.
Yeah.
Like everybody was like, "Oh, I guess that's happening." Or like Mario Kart 8, like everybody was like, "Yeah, but I could just play it on my DS." And I'm like, it just something about that seems totally off because now it's like, dude, I just got a Switch and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. That stuff is tasty. Like the polar opposite reaction, and with
Yeah.
the ports, like you said, half these games people are getting excited about were originally on the Wii U.
Or just like on something else entirely, like for Skyrim, for instance.
I know, and or like
Like,
they're with Skyrim, they're games that have been out for like 10 years, and people are still like, dude, it's coming to Switch. Count me in. Take my money now. It's just insane to look at that, and it was kind of a low point. I mean, where were I know you were still a heavy Wii U player, but was there any point
oh
where you
yeah.
sort of stood on that teetering edge of maybe I should just step away from Nintendo for a bit and see how this goes?
I was still very, very stubborn. I didn't want to get a console that didn't do backwards compatibility well or have free online. So I just like suffered for most of this generation until the Switch came out. I just was very independent. The only reason I picked up an Xbox One is because Black Friday. Like I wasn't really passionate about either platform. It was just like this one's cheap. This one has the racing game I liked on the 360. Take my money.
That's fair, man. That's fair. And I respect you for being a loyalist amongst that. Interestingly enough, looking back, around the time where Nintendo sort of started to enter its dark age was kind of where I started to fall out of gaming for a little while. And a lot of that had to do with the busyness of my schedule. But a lot of
Do you
it,
think some of it had to do with the decline of Nintendo?
part of me is wondering if that's the case because I think for both of us, Nintendo was kind of the company that got us into gaming. So I'm wondering if,
Hmm.
even if I wasn't fully aware, in my subconscious mind, if it was sort of like, oh, all these characters that I loved and that were kind of part of the reason I played games in the first place aren't really getting the games they deserve and nobody around me's playing them, even for the ones that are good. Maybe I'll just kind of step back for a while. And that's sort of
Mm.
what ended up happening. Like, I got a Wii U around launch, but I own, up until like a month ago, I literally owned two games for it, and I hadn't clocked more than 6 hours on the whole system.
Oh wow.
I didn't get it quite at launch. I got it within like 6 months of launch, but still. And then for that console generation, I didn't get an Xbox One until last year, and I barely put any time into that. I got Star Wars Battlefront in like
Mm.
3 months alive and played a little bit of that. Had some fun with Rock Band, but other than that, didn't touch it. Then I got my Nintendo Switch, and it was like everything turned around. Like, I've spent
Yeah.
so much money on games since I got that for either the Switch or the PlayStation or whatever. So it's almost like within my mind, my love of gaming is tied to to Nintendo doing well. Like, whether I want it to be or not, and even if I'm not playing on a Nintendo platform.
Mm. Yeah, it's 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 good, but again, I keep saying this. It's good, but it's so strange and foreign to me that this sort of renaissance in comparison with Nintendo is happening right now.
Right, and I think a lot of it is because we, like, let's be real here. That dark age, probably,
Mm.
like, if we're discounting the portables, what we'll definitely go back and touch on those in a little bit here.
Hmm.
Kind of started around like 2009, 2010, 2011, depending on where you want to place it exactly. And that more or less lasted through the launch of the Switch.
Yeah, I would place it at 2011 because like at that point new Wii games from Nintendo were still trickling out here and there,
Right.
but yeah, after that, man, it was definitely the dark ages.
It was just downhill. And so basically it turned into nobody around you owned a Wii U. Nobody knew what games were coming out for it. And it was just sort of like, does that console even really, like, subconsciously, does that console exist to the general public?
Yeah,
Thankfully, oh, go ahead.
remember most people didn't even know that the Wii U existed. They
Right,
would
it's
see it
like,
in a store and
oh,
go
is that
like,
just a
"Oh,
bigger Wii?
is that the tablet I need for my Wii now? Like what?"
Yeah, exactly.
Do the Wii? I remember I overheard a woman in Target. She was like, "So do the Wii U?" She was asking someone. She was like, "Do the Wii U games like work with the Wii? Can I get this and play it? Like what?
Oh
What is
no.
this?"
But the sad part is that was kind of the public image of the console. To my
Mm-hmm.
memory, it
Mm-hmm.
was that strange. This wasn't like your one-time instance where somebody who's just doesn't know a lot about video games is like, "Oh, I'll just buy an Xbox One game and put it in my PS4 and it'll work." Yeah, you're going to get that from time to time. But this was like the regular perspective you got from a lot of the public was like, "Well, what is that?"
Exactly. And I remember like thinking it later in the day. I was like, I can't like blame the woman really because like even the name Wii U is just abysmal. It's awful. I don't know how
Honestly,
they picked that.
exactly.
That's always been, and I've read articles on this. They seem to agree. That's always been one of the Achilles heels of that platform in general is just the name.
Because
No,
it
like
doesn't distinguish
the
itself.
and the well, the demographic that normally buys from Nintendo, they're all very casual people. They're not into games. Most times, they're not even into technology. They
Right.
see the name Wii U, they don't know what to think.
And it's sort of like, honestly, the amount that Wii U distinguishes itself as, like, by name alone from the Wii is the same amount that PS4 Pro distinguishes itself from PS4. It doesn't even sound like it's really a separate system. It sounds
Actually,
like this
it's I'd
upgraded
argue it's
component.
less.
Yeah,
Because
and honestly, it's even
at
less.
least Sony promoted the PS4 Pro in commercials and made the console look even more different. Like when you look at a Wii and a Wii U and you get them in the same color, there's very little that tells you that they're a different platform.
Exactly. So it was sort of like this identity crisis for a console.
Exactly.
Like, what is this supposed to be?
The funny thing is, I don't even think Nintendo really knew.
And I think that was the issue. And in retrospect, part of me wonders if they were trying to head towards something like the Switch the whole time. And
A lot of people do say that the Switch is what the Wii U was supposed to be.
right, and I part of me almost wonders if the Wii U was like a public beta test of technology to gather as much info as they could, where they were like, all right, this is gonna suck, but we're gonna do it anyway because we're gonna come out better on the other side. And if that's the case, then congratulations to them because they pulled off one of the biggest gambits ever.
They definitely learned a lot from the Wii U, and that's something Nintendo will admit. They learned a lot from it. I don't think, because when the Wii U failed, it failed hard. I don't think they would do something like that on purpose, but
Most likely
yeah.
not, but it's
Hmm.
interesting to look at it from like a storytelling standpoint and be like,
That's true. Even when you like hold a gamepad next to the Switch, yeah,
they look more. You can tell one clearly inspired the other.
exactly.
So let's take a look at Nintendo's lifeline for a minute here. We talked about like our experiences with the DS and such, and how that was cool, and how most people could get on board with that. Where'd you stand on the 3DS? Because I found like it took a lot longer for the 3DS to get moving, for one thing. And a
The
lot of my
thing,
friends that got DSs didn't get 3DSs until much later.
the thing with me is that the whole Nintendo hardware being tanks sort of died around that period. The only reason I got a 3DS, and the only reason I got a new 3DS, is because the previous model failed. I would want to go back and play some good old DS games and find that my DS was total crap. So I'd go into GameStop or whatever, and they're like, "Hey, we have this new 3DS." Ooh, and I was like, "Fine, just give it to me. I bet it'll last longer." And that was basically the only reason I got it.
That's fair. That's fair. Now, on top of that, I'm curious. What model of DS did you have?
What model of DS?
Yeah.
Kind of cut out there. Okay. Um, at that point, it was a DSi.
Oh, dude, the DSi was not built well to last long in my experience. That's probably part of it. But no, I get what you're saying. Like it was that was a let's just like take a second to look at the branding because we talked about a lot that about that with the Wii
Mm,
U. I feel like the
mm.
3DS at least initially had kind of a similar problem because it was like, is this just a DS that has 3D? Like,
Is it not just a DS that has 3D?
hey, shh. It's that
um,
with better marketing. No.
I think it did distinguish itself better because the name was like, sort of like shocking when you heard it like 3DS. Hold on, what is that? You had to step back and process it
It's
if
a
you weren't
six
familiar with
screen
it.
handheld. It has three dual screens.
Dude, if only. Um
Like, have you ever thought about that naming? Or the 2DS, two dual screens.
I know it does. I mean, it sounds good. I think that's the whole point. Is that it just sounds like it because it's 3D and it's a DS. It just sounds good. So
It's clever, but at the
you're
same
not
time,
you're not allowed to look into the terminology,
no, it's not. Yeah,
or
it's
else
not legal.
everything falls apart.
Right.
It's not legal. But
Yeah.
yeah, I actually don't because the 3DS did distinguish itself because it was such an awe factor for people. Like I could get this and I don't need to wear 3D glasses and it's 3D.
That's true. I do remember the hype of that. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
my issue was when that came out, I was really skeptical because like I saw one of my friends get it and they paid it at the $250 price point. I'm like,
Mm,
dude, there's no games for this thing. Like, what are you doing? Like, I don't know if you
that is
remember
true.
the 3DS launch. The library
Yeah,
was awful. Like one of the worst I've ever seen.
dude, I literally got the thing like a week or two after it launched. I understand.
There were like 8
I
games for it. Only 2 or 3
I
of them
only
were actually
remember
good.
I only remember there being two games for it when it came out, and I got both of them.
Yeah.
It was like Asphalt 3D and one of the Nintendogs plus cats.
I know
That
there
was
was a
it.
Street Fighter game that came out either at launch or within like a month or two of launch too.
Yeah, that one definitely came out early. I don't remember if it was at launch or not though.
But yeah, I remember being super skeptical because I saw it and everything else. I wasn't super impressed by the IR cards and everything. I'm like, why am I gonna get this? Like, what's the point? Now it's
The thing is,
oh, go
it's
ahead.
difficult for me because I remember I got this thing out of necessity. I was just like, it plays my DS games. I need a new DS. This one's gonna last the longest. Gimme. But if I was in your shoes, if I was contemplating like if I had a DS and I was contemplating an upgrade, that's definitely a different story.
Right, and like I was in a totally different boat because I had an original model DS that to this day
Ooh.
still works perfectly. Like I'm serious. I could chuck that thing at my wall and I promise you it would still work.
Yeah, I never had the original. Well, I got it like later. But anyway,
Right.
growing up though, I originally got a DS Lite, and that was my DS.
Right. And then I got a DS Lite. And both of those models, like to anybody who's looking to buy a DS now, I would not recommend a DSi. I've yet to meet somebody who had one of the original models of DSi that has lasted more than 2 or 3 years before either the
Hey,
shoulder buttons break or something
hey,
other stupid goes wrong.
hey! My DSi lasted longer than my DS
Well, you're the first example I found of that, so I will stand in
Lite.
silence now because now I can't make this broad, overly general
Also,
statement anymore.
also, one time I put my DSi in water, and it still worked.
There you go, kids. Get the DSi. It's underwater proven. It's waterproof. You can play it in the pool. That's one of the features. I swim with the DSi. No.
Wait, no, it would be. You'd have to put the I in the beginning, so it's ID swim because it would still be DS.
Oh my
ID swim.
god.
There we go. No, DS swim I. No, no. Nintendo hire us. We're so good at naming.
It's brilliant. Hey, it's better than the Wii U, but that doesn't take much.
Oh
So,
my god, literally everything's better than the Wii U. Like, can we just stop for a moment and just process how awful of a name that was? Like,
yup.
they could have called it Wii 2. At
And it
least
would have been
people would
better.
have known that it was a different platform.
Yup. That's the
Even though, like, I hate it when people are like, oh, like, even like back in the day, people would be like, oh, what's the GameCube 2 going to look like? I'm like, why do you assume they're going to call it the GameCube 2? No one does that except Sony. But other than Sony, no one does that. Or Sega wasn't out there proclaiming that they were going to launch the Genesis 2. Like
exactly.
no one does that with consoles. Why do people jump to that?
I know. People
But
need to start thinking more logically, like subtracting 359 digits from your what's it called? Console names going generation to generation.
exactly. I don't know how people don't see it like
I don't know about you, but I'm ready for the PlayStation 356.
that.
It's going to be a good time. No, freaking
Do you think
you're right.
just real quickly, just yes or no, do you think Sony is ever going to change that? Like, are they ever going to release a new platform that's not PlayStation number?
Yeah, the PlayStation V no, the
No,
PlayStation
that's
Vita.
portable.
No.
No, that's portable though. I mean, like, do you think they're ever going to release a home platform called like just I don't know the Sony Nueve or something like really weird and dumb?
I feel like they I don't I don't know. Honestly, the Sony Nueve doesn't sound that bad as a system. Like I know you're just rattling something
The
off, but
thing
I'm
is,
like,
no, the
I'm
thing is,
in.
it does sound like something that they would release. That's why
Yeah, I
I
know. I'm like, I'm in. That's actually not a bad. That's literally just new in like a
think.
messed up like a not precise form of Spanish, but I'm still in. That sounds not bad. But like, I think we're
Yeah,
gonna get to the year 2099, and they're gonna be like, "Yup, PlayStation 14's coming out tomorrow," and I'm like,
only by then.
I know, right? I
Oh
think they're just gonna stick with the numbering system, and to their credit, it's simple. It's not that interesting, but at least it works.
that's true. It does divide the platforms, something that Nintendo, I feel, was not able to do with the Wii U.
Yep. I'm just gonna steer us back on direction a little bit here because
Yeah,
I feel like we
please
could
do.
spend the whole time like
Yeah, yeah.
hating on the Wii U's naming. Back to the
Uh-huh.
whole 3DS thing. What stood out to me most about that console though is how slow people were to get on board with that. Because I remember when the DS came out, it took like a year or two, but within that time frame, you saw the
Hmm.
population that owned one explode. The 3DS, it was like I knew people who were still buying new 3 like not the new 3DS in terms of model, but buying a 3DS brand new in like the year 2014, 2015, 2016. and enjoying it as a brand new experience at the time. And that to me was
Hmm.
very far. And I was like, this has been a real slow steamroll for them. And it eventually turned into one of Nintendo's most successful platforms. And when they had the whole flop that was the Wii U going on, it was a lifesaver for them. And I think it was
That's true.
I think I almost enjoyed it more watching that slow unravel of the system because it was like I was that old guy who people went to like, "Oh, you've had a 3DS for like forever. What are some games you'd recommend here? What do you like about the system?" Or kind of breathing some new life into it, sort of like when you get to watch one of your friends experience one of your favorite things. Cuz once more, even though I was skeptical of the 3DS at first, I actually schemed Walmart so that I managed to get it at the price cut, but also get the ambassador games. Because they have
Nice.
a return policy where within a week, if they make a price cut on an item and you go back with the receipt, they'll give you the price reduction. So I got it 1 week
Oh,
before I knew the
nice.
price cut was dropping, bought it, downloaded the ambassador games, then theoretically returned it in quotes for the price cut, and kept the
Mm.
ambassador games with the price cut. It was a good time. But I'd had one for a while by the time everybody else had gotten it. I'd played a bunch of the games and I had a really good time with it. I honestly think this is one of my more favorite Nintendo handhelds. My biggest issue with it was how many bloody models of the system they made.
Oof. Yeah,
I
that's
think
very true.
I think Jason and I counted, and you had 6 models because you had the original 3DS, then you had the 3DS XL, then you had the Toast, then you had the new 3DS XL, then there was the new 3DS, and there was the 2DS XL. Or I'm sorry, the
Uh,
new 2DS XL.
I assume the Toast was 2DS.
Oh yeah, which, by the way, that was some of the most brilliant marketing I've ever known. I had a friend who like wouldn't get on board with the 3DS because of the price point. 2DS drops, buys it within a week.
I think that's why the platform's done so well. I did want to point out, you mentioned that it was very slow to pick up, and that was very true. One of the things that it was, of course, the price point, but the other thing was that the platform really failed to distinguish itself at first. As we mentioned earlier, there were like two launch games, and
Neither of them were
neither
good.
neither of them were exciting. Yeah, no one was gonna get them for that. And of course, the 3DS as a whole, especially at launch, was essentially just a collection of gimmicks. Like it could do 3D. You could put this card in front of it, and then like a little character jumps out,
And you can play
and,
me games.
and you could take pictures in 3D. Ooh.
Woo! Ah. But what's even more interesting about that is it launched with gimmicks and ended with games that a lot of them don't even like take advantage of the gimmicks at all. Like they
Yeah.
totally drifted away from that. When I remember like some of the early games for the 3DS, you literally needed the 3D feature for some of the puzzles and stuff that they wanted you to solve.
Hmm.
So that was a really odd turning point for the console because it was like we launched with all this stuff that was supposed to make it really good, and by the end of it, we didn't use like any of that. Like you could use it, but it wasn't really doing anything.
Exactly. Like I used to tell my friends when they were like, "Oh, is that a 3DS? How is it and everything like that?" I'd be like, "Yeah, it's fine." And they were like, "Oh, I'm thinking of getting a 2DS." Normally, I'd like try to shame them for it, but really, I was just there like, "Yeah, you're not missing much."
Dude, I'll be honest with you. Did you actually use the 3D feature? Because I didn't, like at all.
Okay, so I used it on rare occasions when I had my first 3DS. The thing is, actually use it a little bit more now because a feature with the new 3DS is that it'll track your face.
Oh,
So
so it
if
makes it
you
more accurate.
exactly like if you were to like tilt it a certain way, like involuntarily, like say a car ride or a bus ride or something, it's less of a pain to use because it'll adjust to where your face is.
No, that's a great point because that's a really cool feature of the system. It made it
Mm-hmm.
so they improved the feature. And I like that
Exactly.
they kept the feature built into that model in an improved format, even though not many people were using it, because it shows that they were trying to appeal to all of their fan base, not just the specified people.
Exactly. It's one of the things I definitely love about the new 3DS.
Now, let's get into like the whole overscope of the Nintendo market at that point after I touch on the new 2DS XL because I want to hit on that real quick. If you've never played on
Sure.
one of those, I highly advise it. I'm not speaking to you specifically, Logan. I'm speaking to everybody.
I I get
Because
it.
honestly, form factor wise, this is my favorite Nintendo handheld. Period. And I'm somebody who backlit modded my Game Boy Advance because I love the form factor of that so much. Nope, this thing is my favorite by far. My only new 2DS XL at this point is one I'm holding in my hands right now. It's my one that I got modded from Japan with a capture card. And part of me hates myself for it because I don't think I can ever play DS games on something like this again without just being disappointed. DS games or 3DS games. Because it runs better, the form factor is great, the screen is a really good size to the point where it doesn't upscale things so much that they look distorted, but it's big enough that it still feels very cinematic. Nintendo really hit the ball on this, and the price point's still brilliant. One of these things is 150 bucks new, and a lot of times you can catch them on sales for like 130. Cannot recommend that system enough. Like, so good. I complain about the 6 model thing, but I will give them credit. Every model, I think they did improve something.
I will say real quick, you mentioned the distortion on the screen not being that big of an issue. One of the things I don't like about my new 3DS XL is that the distortion is an issue. Everything looks blurry. I don't like it.
Oof. Oof.
Yeah,
I guess we come from two different perspectives on there. Maybe it's just that I haven't played on my DSs a whole lot lately when I'm not getting like footage.
I think you just haven't seen my screen.
Maybe. I do know with the
um,
new 2DS XL they were putting in better screens with those systems, or at least
that's
that's what
probably
I've
what it
heard.
is.
Because I know they're brighter for sure. I'm not sure if the overall quality was improved, but I know they're definitely brighter.
Yeah, what was weird, the only reason I have the new 3DS XL is because for some reason in North America, that's the one that released first.
Yeah, the new 3DS, I'm pretty sure you could only get in North America in specialized bundles.
It's so weird.
It really is. It really is.
Because
So,
I wanted the smaller one, but they only
yeah.
had the bigger one.
Well, the
But
small
anyway, go
that's
on.
my one complaint is these don't fit in your pocket nice. Like they're a
Oof.
little too big
Yeah.
for that type of thing. But what I was getting at is like the broad scope of the Nintendo market at this point is this is when you started to hear. I don't know about you, but this is what I used to hear is, dude, why would I play Mario Kart on like a Wii U? Why don't they just put it on the Xbox? Like Nintendo sucks.
Oh,
Their console
yeah.
market's not working. Like, yeah, I can play it on my DS, but just put it on my Xbox or give it to me on
I
my
want
phone.
Zelda on my phone.
Yeah, I know,
Oh,
right?
you have no idea how much that would kill me when I heard that.
It
And
was
I
so painful.
oh my, I do have to commend Nintendo. I am so glad they did not give in and that they stuck to making their own hardware and making sure that they had the control of all that. Because it's just something you knew that if you put Zelda on a phone, it loses something.
Right. But my favorite part about that, and this kind of ties us back to the 3DS thing, and that's kind of why I brought this up, is a lot of those people who were saying that towards the later half of the 3DS's lifespan, once that price started to fall a little bit, are a lot of the people who ended up getting those systems.
Well, I think the reason is because they didn't have it on their phone. They still wanted it on the go. And that was their only option.
Right, and the Wii U didn't exist. So, they were playing, yeah. So they were playing it on here, and it was great. Like, the 3DS, here's my kind of my question for you. Do you think the
Hmm.
3DS would have done as well if the Wii U wouldn't have failed so hard?
Ooh, that's an interesting one because I watched a retrospective recently on the Wii U, and one of the points they hit on was that a lot of games that were on the Wii U were like continuations of games that were first released on the 3DS.
Right.
Because for instance, just a real quick one is Super Mario 3D World. Well,
Yep.
that started off on 3DS as Super Mario 3D Land,
Fantastic
and
game, by the way.
oh yeah, but a lot of that stuff would just be shared between the two platforms. So
Exactly.
I don't know, because when you're in the market for a portable, you don't really consider the other end of that. You don't really consider, well, how's this company doing in the home games market? That's not really something that goes through your mind when you're looking for like a portable handheld. Same thing when you're looking for a home hand or a home platform. You
Right,
don't really
and
consider like, oh, do they have a handheld platform? How's it doing?
that's true. And I think one thing that kind of stands out to me about this on the other side of that argument, because I do see what you're saying, it's kind of it's been a divided market until the Switch was introduced
Hmm.
for a while, is that a lot of these people who wanted to experience titles, because the Wii U didn't really exist to them or they didn't understand what it was or whatever, the
Hmm.
3DS for a while was your premium way to experience Nintendo games,
It
which
was
was
really your only way to experience Nintendo games because, yeah, it's becoming more and more apparent the Wii U just didn't exist at that time point. And a
right,
lot of people, when they've wanted their Smash Bros. Fix or their Mario Kart fix, because of course everyone has to have a Nintendo fix at some point, the
especially
3DS
Smash Bros.
was, Oh yeah, the 3DS was the cheapest, best way to do that. You got
Right.
the games cheap, they were premium, you could take them everywhere, and I think Nintendo really looked at that, and that's part of the reason we probably have the Switch today.
Right. And I think what even stands out to me more about that is the fact that if you're looking at, say, when Sony was in the market, right? They made some really
Hmm.
nice handhelds, but if you're looking at the way to get the most pristine gaming experience, it was on their home console. I think the public viewpoint during this era for Nintendo was the pristine gaming experience was the 3DS, not the Wii U, which is kind of a first in the like history of gaming. Was your portable is your best way to experience this game.
I think that is definitely true, especially when you look at how much more expansive the 3DS library is in comparison to the Wii U library.
It is massive.
Yeah.
And so it's just kind of it's crazy to think about that. And the 3DS, honestly, I could not be more grateful this console ended up existing, as skeptical as I was, because this literally kept Nintendo afloat. Like I honestly think if the 3DS wouldn't have eventually taken off, they could have went under. That was how bad they were
Oh
struggling
yeah.
for a while there. And
And
thankfully,
of course, how well the 3DS was selling to keep them afloat.
yeah. And thankfully, that kind of brings us into what we've seen, this new renaissance for them, where this candle of theirs has kind of just been burning slowly in the background of people's heads, where I almost think the hurt and the failure of the Wii U ended up helping the Switch succeed, because even though people had 3DSs, they didn't necessarily have that full home Nintendo console experience for a very long time, because the tail end of the Wii's lifespan, a lot of people fell off. The Wii U lifespan didn't exist for most people. So when you come
Mhm.
around in 2017 with a Nintendo Switch and you're like, here's all of our games, here's all of our Nintendo first party properties that we're kicking things off with here, totally new skins, HD graphics, and everything. People are like, dude, I haven't picked up Mario Kart on the big screen TV for like 10 years. And then that's everybody around them, and they're like, crap, this is fun again. And that just builds your hype. It just explodes. It was this little piece of dynamite with a fuse that just kept going and going, slowly building towards it with 3DS sales, and then just blows up with the Switch.
That's definitely a fair point. I think you're on the right track there.
And it's been awesome because for the first time in so long, you can walk up to somebody who you know is a gamer, and you can basically assume within the past 6 months they've played one of the Nintendo games you're involved in, whether it be at a friend's house or like just trying out like a GameStop or whatever or something. They've tried it out, they've been experiencing it, they've been playing it, or they're looking to get a Switch.
I'll try to do that at some point. Walk up to someone because that sounds amazing to hear someone else, obsessing over something Nintendo did.
Right, and like it's not necessarily an obsession, but I'm just talking like people who I know are gamers, right? I'll
Yeah,
just
yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, and most of the time they seem to at least be interested in the Switch at the very least. Like
Hmm.
I know people who are hardcore diehard Xbox fans who I was telling, "Oh yeah, I got a Switch the other day." And like, "Dude, you did? That system seems really cool. I've been wanting one for a while. I just don't have the $300 yet." So it's so cool. It's one of the best feelings to watch your it's like rooting for your home sports team if I were a sports fan and seeing them come around and win at the last second. And it's just been
For me, it would be like showing up at one of their games, expecting your half of the stadium to be like empty almost every time, and then just coming in that one day and seeing
everybody
everyone on
there.
your side.
Yep, it's great. It's great. And
Hmm.
almost feel like the Wii U was a worthwhile failure. A, because it led to the Switch technology wise, and B, because I think it made Nintendo finally sever their tie to the traditional gaming market, which I think is where they've been trying to head for a while with a lot of their gimmicks and such. And I think here they did it, and they did it in a big and very successful way.
What do you mean by sever their connection to the traditional gaming market?
Well, if we go back to like, I always use the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo era as an example because I feel like it's one most people are at least relatively familiar with. Those
Hmm.
two systems were directly competing with each other. Like, there's no
Uh-huh.
easy way around it. And I think, if you go into the N64, the PlayStation 1, and the Saturn, same deal. They were directly competing with each other. Same deal again with the GameCube, the Xbox, and the PlayStation 2. With the
Hmm.
Wii, it started to drift a little bit away from that because you had the Xbox and the PlayStation 3, which were very online gaming focused, and the Wii, which drifted way far away from that, way more towards like couch co op and casual play and pick up and go types of games. And then the Wii U kind of continued a little bit in that direction, whereas Xbox and PlayStation went far in the other direction. And then by the time you get to the Switch, you see a Nintendo console where, yeah, it offers this online experience, but the much bigger deal is the fact that it's portable. It's optimized couch co op because you can literally do it anywhere. And they aren't putting emphasis on the same things everybody else is. It's a unique console, it's kind of its
But
own
were
thing.
they putting that emphasis um, on that stuff with the Wii and the Wii U? I don't think they were.
Not
I mean, with
necessarily. I
with
think what I'm
Wii and
getting at is
Wii
they.
U, one of the things that they definitely didn't market was their online multiplayer game.
Right. And I think what I'm getting at there is that fact that I think they've realized this is the better way for them to play it.
Well, of course, I think they've realized that ever since the Wii back in '07 when they launched it. They
Right.
had this entire alternate base that they just sprung up themselves out of nowhere, and it propelled their console to greatness.
Right. And I feel like the Switch is the ultimate separation of, like, I don't want to say full on separation because obviously they're still competing, but it's, if you're going to own two consoles, it's a Switch and one of the other ones in most instances.
In that case, wouldn't it be more like a reunification?
You could almost call it that. I guess what I'm saying is, like, they've made it so
Because
the
now,
Switch.
well,
Okay, go ahead.
now the Switch appeals to that demographic that they were trying to alienate themselves from, the demographic who would traditionally go for consoles like the Xbone and PS4. Now, you said it yourself, some people you know who have those consoles really want to switch.
Right, and what I'm getting at with that is it's no longer to, like, I'm choosing a Super Nintendo or a Sega Genesis. It's, I have a PlayStation 4, I want to Switch in addition to that. Like, it's
Hmm.
not this choose one or the other type of mentality, and I think the Switch is the ultimate iteration of that.
So it's more like a secondary
Or not even
platform.
or secondary or primary. It's like it's kind of this thing that you have in addition to these other things. It's not, oh, I'm gonna buy an N64 or a PlayStation One or a PlayStation, or I'm sorry, or a Sega Saturn. I was thinking the wrong generation there. It's this. Okay, I'm gonna get two of these consoles. I'm gonna get the Switch because that
Hmm.
does one thing that I really really like. I'm gonna get the PlayStation 4 that does this other thing. Because I feel like
Would you
most
say it
people,
functions more like a portable would in that sense? Because
sort of,
yeah, because nowadays, of course, now the Switch is portable. Well, it's always been portable, but now Nintendo's pushing a portable primary platform. At least back in the day, you'd be like, okay, I'll have my PlayStation at home, but on the go, I'll have a Game Boy.
right. And I
Do you think
think
it's more like that because you can have the Switch on the, and then of course have your Xbone for COD or whatever?
sort of, yeah, that's what I'm getting at because it's not, they're not trying to play in the same batting cage as the other companies anymore, which I think is a good thing.
Hmm.
And I think it's great. It's very great because it creates a series of unique experiences.
So
But
you think that the Switch is sort of continuing the indirect competition that they've been having since the Wii?
yep, in some ways, but I'd say they just went as far left as they can with that. And that's
Hmm.
fine. I've always been a big proponent with anything in life that if you're going to go in, go all the way in. And I think they
That's
did,
very true.
and it's great. But yeah, I think that about sums it up for what's been like being a Nintendo fan. There's been a lot of ups and downs, and I think right now we're winning big, and it feels pretty great.
It certainly does.
So let's go and wrap this up with what we've been playing for the week, my friend. What have you been doing?
Well, I've actually tried The Witcher 3
Oof.
on the Expo, and I finally am sitting down, trying to play through it. And I put emphasis on trying because I have it on the hardest difficulty, of course, and I can't even get through the first encounter.
Dude, that's rough. It's rough. That sounds like when I started Etrian Odyssey on the hardest difficulty. It was like, get 2 steps into the dungeon, some weird random text splash kills you.
The worst part is that I have to go through a cutscene each time I respawn.
Oh, dude. That
Yeah,
hurts. Are there like a
it's
s- are there like a series of cutscenes going into the start of the game? Like would it cost you 2 hours to restart it?
no, it's not that bad, but it's definitely like a good 2 minutes.
Okay, because that's what
There's a skip function, but you have to just like hammer it.
right. And that's kind of what I experienced with Kingdom Hearts is like I started off on the hardest difficulty and then I went like, "Oh crap, this is making it so it takes me like twice the amount of time it takes most people to play through this game." And that's not time I have right now. I have such a big back catalog of games I need to get
Mm.
through that I'm like,
Hmm.
maybe I shouldn't have done this, but the early part of Kingdom Hearts is like 2 hours worth of a mix of cutscenes and weird, awkward gameplay on an island, and I'm like, I don't feel like dealing with that again. So I'm just trudging through at this hardest
Oof,
difficulty setting
yikes.
just because of that start. But how are you enjoying The Witcher?
I I haven't got past the first encounter. I don't know.
It might be good.
Yeah, exactly. It looks like it's gonna be great. I just can't play it.
That's fair, man. That's fair. Anything else that's been on your playing list?
Uh, More of the same.
I got
You know
you.
how it is.
I'm adding to that boat of more of the same. Although I added 2 games into that mixture this week. I
Ooh.
cleaned off my PlayStation 2. I actually spent most of earlier today doing that. Totally
Oh,
disassembled
nice.
it, gave it a scrub down, and everything else, because I kind of gave up on finding a functional PS3 fat at a good price. And I popped in Sly Cooper for the first time in a really long time. And it's
Ooh,
weird to
nice.
see where Sony has went with their title exclusives, because you look at back at the PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2 era, a lot of their exclusives they were sort of known for were these action platformer games, versus now it's like these story-driven shooters a lot of times. It's just weird to see that change in identity. And I've also noticed, like, in terms of trends, a lot of times Sony's like main exclusives don't last more than like a whole generation and then the last game of the series on the next console. Maybe
Hmm.
that's just me, but like Ratchet and Clank, they did a whole generation, and I guess they did a couple of games on the PS3, and then there were some spin-offs. Then if you go back to like Crash Bandicoot, right? Most of the main games were on PlayStation 1. And then if you go back to Spyro, the main games were on PlayStation 1, then they had some other stuff on the PS2, and that just kind of disappeared. Then if you look at like Uncharted or The Last of Us is getting a sequel on PS4, but many years later. And Uncharted had its final 2 games on the PS4 after the main series of games were on the PS3. So it's just,
So would you say that those exclusives were are sort of aiming for a more mature audience?
I would definitely say so. I think
Hmm.
what's even stranger to me though is to look at the other company that does a lot of these like heavy exclusive library type of thing, Nintendo. Most of their intellectual properties have stuck with them for basically throughout the lifespan of their consoles versus Sony it seems like they're constantly generating new ones and I like both approaches for different
Hmm.
reasons.
Yeah, that is definitely interesting. Something I haven't really thought about.
But like, yeah, we haven't seen a genuinely new Ratchet and Clank game for a long time. I mean, there was the remake slash reimagining of the original that came out alongside the movie, and we haven't seen a new Sly Cooper game since Thieves in Time, and I want to say that's going on 6 to 7 years old at this point. So yeah, that's a thing. And then the other game I was adding to it was Shinobi, Shinobi 3 specifically for the Sega Genesis. That
Oh,
game
nice.
is a blast. Like I remember my one friend who I used to play Wii with a lot in his basement. When he got an Xbox, one of the first games he got was the Sega Genesis collection, and Shinobi was one of the games he hyped up
Hmm.
like crazy. So when I got out my PSP earlier this week, that I first went to the Sega Genesis collection. I was like, dude, Shinobi's still the crap. Like, fantastic game. If you've never played Shinobi, go out and do it right now. You can buy it on a Sega Genesis collection for like any system you can think of that came out over the past 10 years. So
Only
good.
real Shinobi game I have experience with is the first one on the Sega Master System.
Oh, yes. I'm sure it's still good, honestly. We got 3 games. I'm sure it's still good.
Yeah, it's a little clunky, but overall,
I mean,
yeah.
that's kind of what you're writing in for with a lot of the games from that era. There's a little bit of clunkiness, but I think that's because we're
Hmm.
spoiled with the smoothness of a lot of newer games. So,
We certainly are.
yeah. But I think that about wraps it up for this week, my friend. Any final thoughts?
Uh, no, not really. Just can't wait to see where all this Xbone and Switch goes.
It's crazy. We are living in the crazy time. It's like right around when online play got introduced all over again. It's going to be amazing. But yeah, guys, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, etc. in the comment section down below. If not, constructive criticism is always welcome. And
Hey,
as
don't
for
say that too loudly. Someone might suggest I get a personality at some point.
oh no! Or somebody might suggest that I dull my personality. Little too bright, little too loud, little too obnoxious. You're probably right. But anyway, that's about going to wrap it up for this week. We'll catch you guys next time with more of the New Bark News podcast.